let's talk about John Walker for a minute.
Okay.
So John Walker shows up and he's ready to take revenge on Carly. With his garage welded shield, but it doesn't end up going down quite the way I think he planned. So what do you make of him in this episode? Like, what are your thoughts about him? So what do you make of him in the episode overall? And what are your thoughts about him in that moment where he chooses to save those people in the truck over taking revenge by killing Carly, because he kind of had that choice because she was right there. The truck was right there. So what are your thoughts on that?
So, I really like the John Walker character, right? And Wyatt Russell has done such a good job that even outside of the show, we know that he's been getting, sort of like, crazy death threats and really bad things people, are sending his way. So obviously he's portrayed this character really well, right? And it goes on to build on the whole the better job they're doing of villain crafting, right? Because can we truly say? Now, in the comics, he is. In the comics, U.S. Agent is a villain. I mean, this guy does crazy stuff. He's Homelander levels of evil, right? And maybe we'll see him get there later on in other properties and maybe the Thunderbolt show, wherever Contessa Valentina decides to take him. But when he shows up in this episode, I really thought that Sam and Bucky were going to have a battle on two fronts. I thought they were going to have to deal with the Flag Smashers, and I thought that they were going to have to deal with John Walker, right? And so then he shows up, with his Home Depot shield, and he's like, Morgenthau, it's about to go down. And then Carly says, quite possibly the worst thing she could say. She's like, hey, man, sorry about killing your friend. His death doesn't really mean anything. And I'm like, oh, he's about to hurt you. And then then he throws the shield and she kind of kicks it. And they gave us this really cool moment of everybody looking at the shield, right, that she's just kicked, and it's laying on his side, and you see all like the weld rivets and stuff like that. And she's kind of looking at it, and he's looking at it, and everybody's like, this isn't the shield,
Yeah.
So his arc isn't my favorite of the show because I kind of wanted to see him end on a more nefarious note. I didn't necessarily like to see the whole buddy cop thing at the end of the show where him and Bucky, catch the remaining Flag Smashers with the app, and they make sure to show you he's like patting Bucky on the back, right? And when Sam's giving his speech, he's kind of there like kind of nodding, and when he's done, him and Sam give each other the head nod. I didn't necessarily care for that because I wanted them to keep him sort of a heel, if that makes sense, to sort of leave that open for wherever they take the show forward. But I do see why they did it the way they did it, because you need to care about him in some sort of way. And if we were going to have a redemption or arc in the show, I'm sure fans would have liked to see him redeemed more than seeing somebody like Backtrack redeemed or, the Sharon character redeemed.
I didn't see a redemption arc for Backtrack in this. But
No, I didn't. But I will say this real quick, and this is kind of off topic. I do love the fact that they stay very true to the comics. In the comics, Batroc is one of the world's leading hand-to-hand combatants, right? So I love the fact that thus far in the MCU, the only person who's ever been able to best Batroc that we've seen on screen is Steve Rogers. He kind of whips Falcon in the first episode, and he's kind of whipping Falcon in this episode, and Sam just kind of has to take off. He doesn't really beat him. He just kind of has to take off, So.
I kind of like that because, it like you said, it keeps him more true to the comics, but also I think it shows that Sam still has a little ways to go before he reaches his full potential, right? It kind of felt like that to me. And you know what? Even when Steve fought him, he actually had to try. It wasn't just swat him down and move on to the next thing, you know?
Yep.
So that was cool. Walker. Yeah, we were talking about Walker. So, you know what? So with Walker, I have heard a lot of people online talking about how, he had his redemption and now he's redeemed. And I actually don't see it that way.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, so I want to get your reaction to this, but here's what I'm thinking. He did make the right decision in that big moment, right? Like, because I mean, I don't see him as like this black and white, like he's a villain now. Like, I feel like he is a very damaged individual who wants to be a hero and do the right thing, but oftentimes he's kind of like too damaged to like have it within himself to make those right decisions. And so he did make the right decision there, and I think that was, a good moment for him, but I don't feel like that's totally redeemed him, because I feel like he's still unstable. He like remember that like moment at the end where like Val is leaving and she's like, don't call me Val, and then he has that like he like his head like glitches out for a second, like he's still a damaged individual, and I feel like at the end here, let me see, I made a couple of notes so I don't forget things. I don't get the impression that he's actually changed much.
No, I know. I think they sort of they give us in the show, they give us a very consistent character twitch that he has. He kind of does this, and then he kind of throws his head to the side, and he's like, let's go to work, right? So while the show ended on a good note with him celebrating, with his wife and all of that, I do expect to, I don't think he's necessarily changed. I just think that they decided to leave off on a good note with him, just sort of a feel good moment. But I think we can expect to see darker stuff.
It was, but I mean, also his reaction there, where he's like, "I'm back, I'm back." Oh, all this. Yeah. Like, I felt like he's still really focused on his ego and his status in a way that, and he has like, and here's the other thing. Like, I feel like there's this. It's almost like the show is contrasting him to Bucky in a way, because they're both soldiers who have been through a lot of crap, right? Tons. And whereas Bucky's like doing the work to heal and to better himself and to climb out of this like, damage that he has in himself. Like, Walker's not doing that. He's almost going the other direction and doubling down. Like, no, nothing's wrong. Like, I have to be a hero and like all this stuff. And so, like, remember the moment when he's down on the ground and he's got his shield, which is pretty banged up by then, and they're all like kicking him or whatever, and he like looks at his metal that he like welded to the inside of the shield. Like, actually in that one scene where he was putting it together, I thought maybe he was gonna like melt it down like into the shield, but he actually just kept it there so he could look at it. And I thought, oh, wait a minute, like I'm thinking like maybe in that moment, like he's thinking about that experience, because I think he's also kind of like reliving a moment of trauma or something in that moment, right? Yeah. And I wonder if there's something about that kind of helped him get to the right place where he decided to like help the people instead of just going off and like killing Carly or whatever. Like,
that's a very good point. That's a very good point, and I hadn't really thought about it in those terms. It's very interesting that you say that. I hadn't really thought about it as them juxtaposing Bucky to the John Walker character. And now that I think about it, I think you're right. I think that's what they did spend a little bit of time doing. And when they show the scenes of him like sort of putting the shield together, and they show him sort of welding the Medal of Honor to the shield. We had already seen clips from the trailer of him arriving with that shield, so I was wondering, like, did they CGI out the metal, for the trailer so we wouldn't see it and know that it wasn't the shield? But in that scene where he kind of sees it on the back, I was like, okay, cool. I think it was, like you said, I think it was supposed to be sort of a grounding mechanism for him. I think, he knows that he goes off the rails a bit, and I think it was meant to be sort of like a grounding rod. Like, hey, this is who you are. This is who you are. Like, it
reminded me of that conversation he had with Lamar at like the table or whatever, which must have been before or right around the time that he took the serum, where he's talking to Lamar, and he's like, and Lamar's like, you always make the right decisions in the heat of battle. You got these medals. And he was like, yeah, to remind me of the worst day of my life. And I was reminded of that conversation because, I think you're right. It was like a grounding mechanism for him. It kind of, maybe he put it there to try and remind himself of what's important, Yeah. And so, and this was also a show that didn't go like, it wasn't like things are not black and white in this show. right?
No,
In terms
nope.
of the morality of it, you know. And so I think it was appropriate to not just make him an all-out villain, like he's going to try and murder Sam and Bucky, or whatever. And where they left him more of in a gray area at the end, I guess.
Yeah.
But so that's kind of how I've been thinking about it. And so let's see. So they did call him U.S. agent, and they gave him the black and red uniform. Right?
Yes.
Which doesn't he have that in the comics? The black and red
yeah.
uniform like that?
Yeah, so in the comics he has the black outfit, he has the black costume, and his shield ends up being black, sort of around the edge and around the middle. And where Captain America has a star, he sort of has the letters US. So it's very comic accurate in that respect. I didn't like the choice of lighting that they used in that scene, because when he walked out, and he's like, he has to say it vocally, so maybe they knew as well. He says, hey, it's the same thing, but it's just black. I couldn't really see much of a visual difference. It
was a pretty dark blue before, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was already a pretty dark blue, and they kind of had him standing in front of the windows with a lot of natural light coming in. So I don't know if maybe my sight isn't the best, but I really couldn't tell a difference. I think maybe they should have lit that scene a bit different so that we could see the contrast.
Yeah, it was, but it was like exactly the same as the other outfit, except black instead of blue.
He's just black, man. It's like, okay, I'll take your word for it.
And I like the way he delivered that line where he's like, it's the same except black. Yeah. So that was interesting. Okay, so last big question about John Walker. There was something interesting I thought about how. The last we see of his like DIY shield there was that it was all broken and flimsy and he tossed it down and like discarded it. Like I feel like there's maybe some level of symbolism in there that like he when he tried to hold the symbol that it didn't quite hold up, something about that. Did you have any thoughts on that or reaction to it when you saw it or like what do you think about that?
I think they were very heavy-handed with the symbolism, because very, very close to that moment. I can't remember exactly the sequencing, but very close to that moment, we see Sam and we see Bucky and John Walker kind of standing there, in awe of Sam, because the truck's about to fall, and Sam kind of catches it right. And when I saw that, I was like, okay, how is Sam doing this? Because he doesn't have superhuman strength, and maybe he's just using the downward thrust from the jetpack. But then you kind of see the smaller gadgets that are coming out of the wings to assist him in that regard. So and I think at that. One of his upgrades, and he had the shield on his back, so I think that the symbolism was very heavy-handed, as you said, to sort of show you that Walker tried to wield the shield, and we see what he did with it, and then he tried to make his own symbol, and we see what happened to that. Because one of my favorite scenes of his interactions with the shield is when he's fighting one of the flag smashers and the guy's just like punching it and he's just like denting it up, and on the other side of the shield, John Walker is looking at it and he's seeing a dent, like, wow, this didn't happen with the vibranium one. I like that we don't see him pick that shield back up, and I would imagine that at some point in the future, we'll see him get another shield that's maybe made out of, vibranium or adamantium.
Yeah, you said in the comics he has one, right?
Yes, he in the comics he does have one. I'm not sure what it's made out of. I'm not sure, with Wakanda, sitting on most of the world's vibranium, and the whole significance of Cap's shield being, hey, this is one of the only pieces of vibranium that exists outside of Wakanda. I think it would be sort of cheap for them to just show him the next time on our screen and say, hey, we got you another circular piece of flying vibranium.
I kind of don't want him to have a vibranium shield, No. I don't feel like he deserves it.
But now that Disney owns all the Fox properties, and there are whispers of a possible Wolverine series coming out. Maybe in whatever medium we see John Walker next, maybe in like the Thunderbolt show, we see Wolverine and we see the introduction of adamantium.
Yeah, adamantium. Because that could happen, right? Maybe he gets an adamantium shield or something, right?
Yep.
So
Yep.
I'd be interested to see in the MCU how they differentiate between those two metals, you know, what that means and all that.
Yep.
That's just kind of interesting. Yeah, so, you know, John Walker, again, I think he's a really great character to be in the MCU, and I think that there's a lot of stuff that they can do with him moving forward. And he's been kind of I've kind of like loved to hate John Walker in this show. He's been like my favorite punching bag because I've just been like, I just really wanted to like just punch him in the face. Not that I would do that in real life, but he's been infuriating, you know? But okay, so that's John Walker. Do you have any final thoughts about him before we move on?
Whatever they choose to do with him next, I will be excited to see it. I hope that they build on what they did with him in this show. So I hope the next time we see him, you know, it's not a complete deviation from sort of what we saw as his origin story here, you know. So if we see him in a Thunderbolt show, you know, I hope we see him, you know, with his wife, you know, I hope we still see him sort of dealing with losing his best friend, you know, I hope we see him having those character struggles. If the next time we see him, you know, he's just a mustache twirling villain, you know, I feel like that would not be doing justice to what they established. So
yeah, I totally agree with that.